Imagine for a second, just imagine leaving your front door wide open because you consider your neighbor like a really great friend.
Right.
Even as you stand there and literally watch them buy lockpicks.
Yeah.
You watch them test your windows and aggressively take over the house next door.
Just blatantly doing it.
Exactly. You're watching them do it, but you just keep smiling and, offering them a cup of sugar, completely convinced that your good intentions are going to act as this magical shield against their very obvious actions.
It's a great analogy, honestly.
Well, that is exactly what India did in 1950. 12 years before a single shot was fired in the Sino-Indian War of 1962, a document sat on the Prime Minister's desk predicting the exact disaster that was about to unfold.
It really is. It's one of the most remarkable and ultimately tragic documents in modern strategic history.
Yeah.
We are looking at an absolute masterclass in strategic foresight that was just completely ignored.
Which is so frustrating to look back on.
Oh, absolutely. And today, for the listeners who have been with us, we are stepping away from the freezing mud of the Himalayas.
Right. No battlefield tactics today.
No, we are taking the raw data of this historical defeat and bringing it into the highest rooms of power.
The war rooms.
Exactly. Because 1962, it wasn't just a military failure. It was a systemic collapse of national security planning.
Yeah, a total breakdown. And our guiding principle for this deep dive, and by the way, welcome to Module 6 of 6, the final module of our revision series on the Sino-Indian War.
The finale.
Right. The guiding principle here is that failure, when analyzed honestly, becomes future strength.
That's exactly it.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand the autopsy of 1962, we really have to start with the prophecy of 1950.
The Tell letter.
Yes. We are looking at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's urgent, sweeping letter to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru.
And reading this text, it genuinely feels like Patel had a crystal ball.
It really does. China was just moving into Tibet at the time.
Yeah, right. The geopolitical tectonic plates were shifting massively. And Patel sat down, he reviewed the correspondence between the External Affairs Ministry, the Indian ambassador in Peking, and the Chinese government, and, well, he didn't mince words.
No, he did not. He explicitly used the word perfidy.
Perfidy, yes.
He said China was actively trying to delude India with these professions of peaceful intentions.
And we have to look closely at what Patel meant by perfidy in that specific diplomatic context.
Because he wasn't just name-calling.
Exactly, no. He wasn't just throwing around insults. He was conducting a rigorous threat assessment based on the documents in front of him.
Right.
Patel noted that the Chinese government was managing to instill this false sense of confidence in the Indian ambassador.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. He read the ambassador's dispatches and saw just a total lack of firmness. He pointed out that the Indian ambassador was actually offering unnecessary apology for Chinese actions in Tibet.
Wait. Unnecessary apology.
Yeah, literally apologizing for things China was doing aggressively. Patel recognized that India was operating on this diplomatic frequency of trust and, anti-imperialist solidarity.
Well, China was playing a totally different game.
Exactly. China was operating on a frequency of hard power and territorial consolidation.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Let me challenge Patel's foresight for just a second.
Sure.
Isn't it a bit easy to praise this letter in hindsight?
Yeah.
For you listening to this, you have to look at India's position in 1950.
It was a very different world.
Right. The country was practically standing alone on the world stage. They were outside the Russian camp.
Yeah.
They were desperate for regional stability just to focus on nation building.
They had massive internal priorities.
Exactly. India was championing China's entry into the United Nations. They were securing assurances from the Americans regarding Formosa. Weren't they just doing whatever they could to build a bridge?
That's the argument, yeah.
So to say the ambassador was being duped feels, a bit harsh. Maybe they were just engaged in extreme necessary diplomacy because they couldn't afford an enemy right on their border.
See, that is exactly the prevailing strategic optimism of the era that Patel was arguing against. You are articulating the exact logic Nehru and the External Affairs Ministry were using at the time.
Okay.
But Patel's brilliance was that he wasn't using hindsight, right? He was looking at the raw data of Chinese behavior in the moment.
So he saw through the diplomacy.
Right. Patel wrote that despite all of India's advocacy for China at the UN, despite all the diplomatic cover India was providing them regarding Formosa, China was not convinced of India's good intentions.
They just didn't buy it.
Not at all. The text of his letter notes that the Chinese distrusted India so completely that they actually viewed India as tools or stooges of Anglo-American diplomacy.
Oh, wow. So no matter how nice India was being, China just saw them as Western puppets.
Exactly. Patel argued that when you are dealing with a state that operates on a mentality of, whoever is not with us is against us,
Right, that binary worldview.
yeah, you cannot bridge that gap with unilateral goodwill. It just doesn't work.
It's the ultimate realist versus idealist clash, really.
It truly is.
Patel warns Nehru that the language coming out of Peking isn't the language of a friend. It's the language of a potential enemy.
A potential enemy. He used those exact words.
And then he takes a hammer to the biggest historical comfort blanket India had ever known, which is the Himalayas.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Because for centuries, this massive mountain range was seen as an impenetrable barrier, right? It was the snowy shield against any threat from the north.
Nobody thought you could launch a full-scale invasion over those peaks.
Right, but Patel points out that with Tibet disappearing as an independent buffer state, and this strong, united China expanding its military infrastructure right up to the Himalayan passes,
The shield is gone.
that shield was effectively gone, yeah.
And this is a monumental paradigm shift in grand strategy for the region. I mean, think about Indian defense calculations up to that exact point in history.
They were all focused westward.
Right. Historically, they were based almost entirely on maintaining superiority over Pakistan on the western and northwestern fronts.
Because the north was just assumed to be safe.
Secure by default, exactly. But Patel explicitly lays out that for the first time in centuries, India is facing a two-front threat.
Which is a logistical nightmare.
Absolutely. The defense apparatus would suddenly have to stretch to cover the north and northeastern fronts simultaneously.
And Patel deeply understood that this new adversary was fundamentally different from previous historical threats.
He did. He understood the ideological component.
Yes, the cloak of ideology. This is a concept from his letter that I think is incredibly profound, and we really need to highlight this for you guys.
It's crucial.
He warns that this isn't just old-fashioned territorial expansion. He states that communist imperialism uses a cloak of ideology, which makes it 10 times more dangerous than traditional expansionism.
10 times more dangerous.
Can we unpack that? How does that actually change the nature of the threat on the ground?
It changes everything about how a state forecasts conflict. I mean, traditional imperialism or territorial expansion is usually driven by clear, calculable motives, right?
Like resources or ports.
Exactly. Resources, strategic ports, defensible borders. You can negotiate with traditional expansionism because it operates on a balance of tangible power.
Say transacts.
Right. But when a nation cloaks its expansion in a universal ideology, in this case communism, it gives them a built-in justification to ignore existing treaties.
To ignore international norms altogether.
Exactly. Patel warned that beneath this ideological cloak, China was concealing deep racial, national, and historical claims.
So they aren't just taking land, they are quote-unquote liberating it.
That's the exact word they use. The ideology allows them to frame their territorial aggression not as conquest, but as liberation.
Wow.
It means they don't see the McMahon Line or existing borders as legitimate agreements between states.
They see them as relics.
Relics of Western imperialism that must be erased.
And because of that ideological cloak, the threat doesn't just stop at the physical border.
Oh, it bleeds right through it.
This is where Patel shifts from macro geopolitics to the micro realities of border security. And it's terrifyingly accurate. I mean, he lists the weak spots point by point.
He names them all.
Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, Darjeeling, the tribal areas in Assam.
Right.
He notes that continuous defensive lines simply do not exist in these terrains. The scope for infiltration is virtually unlimited.
Because you can't put a fence across the Himalayas.
Right, and he points out that Indian police protection is limited to just a handful of passes. But the real genius of this document, to me, is how he connects these external vulnerabilities directly to internal security.
That is the hallmark of a true grand strategist right there. The ability to see the interconnected web of security.
Yeah, he doesn't just look at the border.
Patel doesn't compartmentalize. He tells Nehru that side by side with the external military danger from China, India is going to face severe internal problems.
Domestic communist groups.
Exactly. He notes that previously, the Communist Party of India had extreme difficulty getting supplies, arms, and sanctuary from abroad.
Because they had to go through Burma or Pakistan.
Right, they had to navigate difficult Burmese or Pakistani frontiers or long, heavily policed seaboards.
But with China in Tibet,
With China consolidating its hold on Tibet right at the border, Patel realizes the game has changed entirely.
The logistics of insurgency change overnight.
Overnight. He warns that Indian communists would now have comparatively easy access to Chinese communist arsenals.
So instead of a few guys with old rifles,
Instead of dealing with isolated pockets of rebellion in the interior, India might face highly armed, ideologically aligned communist insurgencies right along the northern and northeastern frontiers.
where they can just hop the border for safety.
Exactly, where the insurgents could safely retreat across the border into China for sanctuary and resupply.
He is basically predicting a hybrid war scenario in 1950.
Which is astounding foresight.
And he doesn't just outline the apocalypse either. He provides a massive, comprehensive 11-point action plan to prevent it.
A full blueprint for national survival.
Yeah, we see in the source text that he demands an immediate military and intelligence appreciation of the Chinese threat. He calls for a complete redisposition of military forces to cover the new northern front.
He was pushing for massive structural changes.
He even tells the government they urgently need to reconsider their plans to retrench or downsize the army, which was the prevailing political mood at the time, right?
Yeah, downsizing the military was very popular post-independence.
He even suggests they need to rethink their diplomatic advocacy for China's entry into the UN. It is a complete master plan.
It really is.
So the obvious screaming question is, if this incredibly clear-eyed, detailed, actionable warning is literally sitting on the Prime Minister's desk in 1950.
How do we get to 1962?
Exactly. How do we arrive at the absolute catastrophic unpreparedness of 1962?
Well, to answer that, we have to transition from the strategic documents to the actual human beings who are running the state.
Right.
We have to look at the cast of characters because the road to the 1962 defeat is basically paved by a masterclass in dysfunctional leadership.
It really is.
We have to start at the top, obviously, with Prime Minister Nehru.
Because the buck stops there.
Exactly. We know he ignored Patel's warnings and continued to court China through the 1950s.
Right.
But the sources reveal a critical internal psychological factor that shaped his entire military policy.
Which was?
Paranoia. Specifically, the people around Nehru deeply exploited his paranoia of a military coup.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate again, though.
Go for it.
Was that paranoia entirely unfounded? I mean, you look around the post-colonial world in the 1950s, and newly independent democracies are falling to military dictatorships left and right.
It's true.
Pakistan, Egypt, various nations in Latin America and Asia.
It was a trend.
Right, so from Nehru's perspective, a massive, well-armed standing army might have genuinely looked like the single biggest threat to India's fragile, newborn democratic institutions.
And that is a very fair historical contextualization. It's precisely why the paranoia took root so effectively in his mind. The fear of a military junta was a legitimate post-colonial anxiety.
Right.
However, the consequence of that fear was a catastrophic miscalculation of external defense requirements.
Because you still have enemies outside your borders.
Exactly. Because Nehru feared a strong, independent military leadership, he deliberately kept the army structurally weak and under-resourced.
Wow.
He convinced himself that a large standing army was just unnecessary for border defense.
So what did he think was necessary?
His view, which was heavily influenced by the sycophants around him, was that a police force, or at best lightly armed paramilitary units, would be totally sufficient to keep the peace on the Himalayan borders.
Which is just staggering when you really think about it.
It is.
I mean, you have Patel detailing a heavily armed, ideologically driven, battle-hardened Chinese military absorbing Tibet.
Right.
And the Indian response is essentially to send out a beat cop to patrol the world's most unforgiving mountain range.
That's practically what they did.
But Nehru wasn't executing this alone. He had a defense minister, V.K. Krishna Menon.
Menon.
And the source text does not hold back on Menon.
No, it is brutal.
It describes him as a brilliant but waspish man, and flatly calls his tenure as defense minister an unmitigated disaster.
Unmitigated.
The text says he insulted service chiefs, played favorites with military promotions, and deeply politicized the professional Indian army.
Menon is he is a textbook example of how toxic civilian leadership can just destroy military efficacy.
Yeah.
The politicization of promotions meant that professional competence was no longer the primary metric for advancement.
All about who you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ideological alignment with the defense minister became the key to career survival.
Which just hollows out your senior officer corps.
It completely guts it. But there is one specific policy Menon instituted that is, perhaps the most damaging bureaucratic decision in military history.
The no-minutes rule.
The no-minutes rule.
This detail in the sources absolutely stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
It's unbelievable.
Menon instituted a strict rule that during top-secret conferences regarding military operations and border policy, absolutely no minutes were to be kept.
None. Zero paper trail.
No official record of who said what intelligence was presented, or what decisions were finalized. We really need to break down the mechanics of this for the listener.
We do.
How does a massive bureaucracy, let alone a military command structure, even function without a record of decisions?
It doesn't.
Right.
It simply doesn't function. That's the tragic reality of it. Let's look at how military orders are actually supposed to cascade down the chain.
Okay, walk me through it.
So the political leadership makes a policy decision. The military chiefs translate that into an operational directive. That directive goes down to the quartermaster general to organize logistics. It goes to the master general of ordnance to release ammunition.
It goes to the railways to organize transport.
Exactly, and then to the tactical commanders to actually position the troops.
Okay.
All of this requires a massive paper trail. If a division needs winter clothing because they are being deployed to 14,000 feet, the quartermaster needs the official minute authorizing that expenditure and movement.
Right. The quartermaster isn't just going to empty out a warehouse based on a rumor that a meeting happened in Delhi.
Exactly. By insisting on no minutes, Menon practically paralyzed the bureaucratic machinery of the state.
But why? Why would he do that?
Well, the source text explains the psychological motive behind this. The practice of keeping no minutes absolved anyone from the responsibility of any major decision in the ultimate analysis.
Plausible deniability.
Yes, it was a deliberate, institutionalized mechanism for plausible deniability.
That is so cynical.
If an operation failed, there was literally no piece of paper tying the disastrous order back to the defense minister.
The military officers on the ground would just be left holding the bag.
Exactly. When you combine a defense minister who plays favorites and refuses to keep records with a prime minister who is paranoid about a strong army,
you are dismantling your national defense from the inside out.
You're doing the enemy's job for them.
And, as we know, nature abhors a vacuum.
It sure does.
Into this void of professional military strategy steps B. and Mullick,
the director of the Intelligence Bureau.
Right. And according to the documents, Mullick was very close to Nehru, and he is the one who propelled the government's infamous forward policy.
Forward policy, yes.
Mullick pushed this policy without the military wherewithal to implement it, based entirely on his own unshakable and completely flawed premise that the Chinese would simply not react.
Which is insane.
We have an intelligence director dictating operational military policy. His grand idea was to establish isolated police posts wherever India could, pushing them right up to the border.
And even behind Chinese lines.
Right, just to, quote-unquote, register a claim on the territory.
Mullick represents the ultimate failure of intelligence objectivism.
How so?
Well, the role of an intelligence director is to gather data, analyze the adversary's capabilities and intentions, and present that reality to the policymakers.
Even if it's bad news.
Especially if it's bad news. Instead, Mullick was operating in a complete echo chamber.
He created the policy.
He created a policy, the forward policy, and then tailored his intelligence assessments to justify it.
Oh, wow.
He told the political leadership exactly what they wanted to hear, that they could aggressively claim territory without sparking a war.
But logically, militarily, how absurd is this concept? Putting unsupported men in the freezing Himalayas just to plant a flag.
It's madness.
If you are placing a post behind enemy lines, you aren't projecting strengths, right? You are just offering hostages to fortune.
It is the absolute definition of a logistical and tactical nightmare. Look, in mountain warfare, a forward post is only as strong as its supply lines and its ability to be reinforced. You are dealing with extreme altitudes, freezing temperatures, and incredibly rugged terrain.
You can't just hike over to help them.
No. If you place a small police post or a platoon miles away from your main forces with no connecting roads, no artillery support, and no quick reaction force available,
They're sitting ducks.
They are tactically useless. The source text explicitly notes that Mullick did not realize that these isolated posts with no support from the rear would, quote, fall like ninepins the moment hostilities actually broke out.
Which is exactly what happened.
Exactly.
So Mullick is playing general, Menon is erasing the paper trail, Nehru is starving the army of resources. Where is the actual military brass in all of this?
That is the big question.
Why aren't they pushing back? Well, the sources give us a grim picture there, too. The Army chief at the time was General P.N. Thapar.
General Thapar.
And he is described in the text as being, frankly, too timid to cross Menon's path.
Yep.
He wouldn't even overrule his own subordinate commander in charge of the operations in the Northeast.
And why wouldn't the Army chief overrule a subordinate?
Because that subordinate was Menon's hottest favorite, Lieutenant General B.M. Call.
General Call. He is perhaps the most central, tragic military figure in this entire operational failure.
Tragic for the men under him, certainly.
Right. Before the war, he served as the Chief of General Staff at Army HQ.
Which is the nerve center of military planning.
Exactly. And on the eve of the war, he was appointed to command the newly raised 4V Corps in the East, directly responsible for the NIFA theater.
Okay, so he's in charge of the hot zone.
The hottest zone. The text describes him as a man of exceptional dynamism, excelled only by his intense ambition.
Uh-oh.
But, and this is a catastrophic, but he had absolutely no experience of combat.
Wait, a Corps commander with no combat experience?
None. He was an officer from the Army Service Corps.
A supply officer.
A supply officer who had maneuvered his way into combat command because he was a distant relative of Nehru and Menon's hand-picked favorite.
A supply officer with zero combat experience is put in charge of the most complex, high-altitude mountain warfare theater in the world.
It's almost hard to believe.
And his command style, according to the sources, was disastrous. I mean, he completely bypassed the established chain of command.
It did.
He would issue important signals and operational orders on a person-to-person basis, reaching out directly to lower formation commanders.
Skipping the division and brigade commanders entirely.
Which is insane.
It creates absolute chaos on the battlefield. Think about it. When an Army Corps commander issues orders directly to a battalion commander, the brigade and division commanders are left entirely in the dark.
They have no idea what their own troops are doing.
They don't know where their troops are moving, they can't coordinate artillery, they can't plan logistics.
It just fractures the cohesion of the entire fighting force.
Completely fractures it.
And it gets worse, right? During the height of the crisis, as the Chinese are massing on the borders, Call falls seriously ill.
Yes, with pulmonary edema.
Right, and he is evacuated back to Delhi. But instead of replacing him with a capable combat commander on the ground,
Menon orders that Call continue to command the battlefield from his sickbed in the capital.
it defies belief.
It really does.
You have an army chief who is too timid to speak up, a theater commander with no combat experience trying to run a mountain war via person-to-person signals from a sickbed hundreds of miles away.
An intelligence director pushing isolated police units into unsupported traps.
And a defense minister ensuring no one writes any of it down.
When you lay it out chronologically and structurally like that, the result on the battlefield, it ceases to be a surprise.
It's inevitable.
It becomes an inevitability. Exactly. The subordination of professional military reality to political vanity and bureaucratic sycophancy, it created a hollow force.
The military architecture was rotten at the core.
Rotten. And when that hollow force met a prepared, well-resourced, battle-hardened Chinese military.
The collapse was rapid.
Rapid, violent, and total.
And that violent exposure of India's capability mismatch is exactly what forced the military to demand answers, the very moment the guns fell silent.
They had to know what went wrong.
Right. The war ends on November 21st, 1962. Exactly 23 days later, the Army commissions an official operational review.
The Henderson Brooks Report.
Yes, we know it today as the HBR. It was authored by Lieutenant General Henderson Brooks and Brigadier P.S. Bhagat.
And Bhagat was a Victoria Cross recipient, highly respected former director of military intelligence.
Right, so these are serious guys. This is the top secret autopsy of the defeat. But before we look at the brutal realities they found on the ground, we have to talk about the handcuffs they were forced to wear.
The limitations placed on this report are just as revealing as its actual contents.
Seriously.
When Army headquarters commissioned this review, they gave the two-member committee very specific, highly restricted terms of reference.
Right, they couldn't just look at everything.
No. They were allowed to examine issues of training, equipment, the system of command, the physical fitness of troops.
The capacity of commanders to influence their men, yeah.
Right. But, and this is the crucial caveat, they were specifically ordered not to review the functioning of the Army headquarters itself.
Which is essentially telling an investigator to find out why a car crashed, but explicitly forbidding them from looking at the steering wheel or the brakes.
Precisely. That is exactly what it was.
Wow.
And as a direct result of that restriction, Brooks and Fagat could not examine the relationship between the Ministry of Defense and Army headquarters.
So they couldn't touch Menon.
Right. They couldn't investigate Menon's no-minutes policy. They couldn't investigate Mullick's intelligence failures at the national level.
Or the strategic directives that forced the troops into those impossible situations to begin with.
Exactly. The report also didn't examine whether offensive air power should have been used, or the diplomatic maneuvers, or the international equations with the U.S. and USSR.
They were completely boxed in to looking only at the operational and tactical execution on the ground.
Kept in a very tight box.
So my question to you is, if they couldn't investigate the top brass, if the Ministry of Defense and the Prime Minister's office were totally shielded, is this report even useful?
Well,
Or is it just, an institutional scapegoat document designed to blame the tactical commanders for a strategic failure?
it's a vital question. And yes, it absolutely was an attempt to shield the highest political and military leadership from direct institutional scrutiny.
Right.
However, despite these severe restrictions, the report remains incredibly useful because Brooks and Fagat refused to write a whitewash.
They push back.
They used the limited mandate they had to produce a document that was absolutely blistering in its honesty regarding the operational realities.
So they read between the lines.
They couldn't indict Menon directly, but by ruthlessly exposing the catastrophic logistical and command failures on the ground, they implicitly indicted the system that created those conditions.
Got it. And the sources describe the summary of this operational review in the Eastern Sector, NEFA, as a, quote, sordid tale.
Sordid, yes.
Let's dive into what they actually found. The report details how Army formations simply disintegrated or fled the scene of battle.
It says troops fell like 9 pins to advancing Chinese forces.
Which is just a horrific image.
It's replete with examples of inadequate reinforcements or reinforcements just not showing up at all.
And it heavily criticizes a specific tactical deployment, stating that troops were deployed in penny pockets.
Penny pockets, yeah.
Let's break down the physical reality of a penny pocket deployment for the listener. Why is this such a disastrous way to fight a mountain war?
Well, a penny pocket deployment is the direct, fatal consequence of Mullick's forward policy.
The policy of just planting flags everywhere to register a claim.
Exactly. Instead of taking your available forces, say, a brigade of 3,000 men, and concentrating them on a highly defensible ridgeline.
Right, where they have usually supporting fields of fire, overlapping artillery coverage, a consolidated supply line.
Exactly. Instead of doing that, you take those 3,000 men and you scatter them into tiny, isolated groups of 30 or 40 men across hundreds of miles of vast, rugged terrain.
So they are completely isolated.
Completely. They are separated by deep valleys and massive peaks. They often have no radio contact with each other.
Wow.
If one platoon is attacked by a Chinese battalion of 800 men, the neighboring platoon 5 miles away can't hear them, can't see them.
And it certainly can't hike over a 15,000-foot mountain in time to save them.
Impossible. The report states that formations were issued impossible orders without adequate manpower or equipment.
Right.
The penny pockets were systematically surrounded and annihilated one by one.
Which is heartbreaking.
It was an overwhelming disconnect between the tasks assigned by Delhi and the resources available at all levels of command.
So it wasn't the soldiers' fault.
No, this wasn't a failure of the individual soldier's bravery. It was a systemic, structural failure of deployment.
And that structural failure is heavily linked to the collapse of intelligence, right?
Oh, massively.
Because we already know Mullick insisted at the national level that China wouldn't react. But the HBR highlights how this intelligence vacuum cascaded down to the tactical level.
Right down to the trenches.
The report says that commanders and troops on the ground remained blissfully unaware of Chinese operational moves.
Blissfully unaware.
And because of this, they were led into one ambush after another.
It's tragic.
But here's the detail that truly highlights the bureaucratic dysfunction. The Military Intelligence Directorate in Delhi was actually producing weekly intelligence reviews.
They were doing the work.
They were gathering data on Chinese troop movements. But the dissemination of these reports was so utterly broken that these reviews were reaching the formations on the front lines 6 to 7 weeks late.
6 to 7 weeks late, which renders the intelligence completely, utterly useless.
It's absurd.
It crosses the line from tragedy to administrative farce. In the fluid dynamics of mountain warfare, a Chinese operational move from 3 days ago is critical, actionable, life or death information.
Right. Getting your military intelligence 7 weeks late in the middle of an active conflict is like getting a weather forecast for a Category 5 hurricane a full month after your house has already been blown down and washed out to sea.
That's exactly what it's like.
It helps absolutely no one.
No one. And because of this massive delay, the report notes an overall deficiency among Indian commanders in, quote, reading the battle.
Because they had no data to read.
Exactly. There was a total failure to comprehend Chinese strategy and tactics, which, ironically, the report notes were very similar to the tactics China had openly used years earlier in the Korean War.
So it shouldn't have been a surprise.
Not at all. The Chinese used infiltration, outflanking movements, roadblocks behind Indian lines to cut off retreats.
It was textbook.
It was textbook, and India was totally blind to it.
And this brings us to one of the most crucial concepts analyzed deeply in the Henderson Brooks Report: leadership and the concept of moral courage.
Moral courage, yes.
The report explicitly states that there was a massive lack of moral courage among the senior staff and commanders.
And we really need to define this. In a military context, moral courage is distinct from physical courage.
Right. Physical courage is charging a machine gun nest.
Exactly. Moral courage is the willingness of a professional officer to look their political or military superiors in the eye.
To look Call or Thapar or Menon in the eye.
Yes, and clearly state the operational difficulties. It is the willingness to say, the task you have given me is militarily impossible with the resources provided, and I will not send my men to die pointlessly.
But the system actively punished that, didn't it?
Oh, completely. The report notes that those few officers who did exhibit this moral courage, who actually spoke the truth to power, were simply removed from command.
Just fired.
Fired and replaced by sycophants who would just say yes.
And when you purge the realists and promote the yes men, you end up with the chaotic command environment that the report details.
Exactly. You get call bypassing echelons of command by issuing direct operational orders to lower-level troops.
You get frequent mid-battle changes in command where officers are flown in to take over brigades they have never seen.
On terrain they don't know, leading men they haven't met.
Right. And inevitably, this leads to what the report calls panic reaction by senior commanders.
Panic reaction, yeah.
The most glaring example they give of this panic reaction is the general officer commanding of the 4th Division.
At Sila.
Right. He was in charge of defending Sila. Now, for the listener, Sila was a highly defensible, incredibly strong mountain position.
It was a fortress.
It was the kind of terrain where a smaller defending force could bleed a massive attacking force dry.
Yes.
But the senior commander panicked regarding his supply lines and potential outflanking, and he gave premature evacuation orders.
He essentially abandoned a fortress position.
Right, causing the entire defense line to collapse in a chaotic retreat toward Bomdila. It was a complete rout.
It is a stark, depressing contrast. The report is blistering in its critique of these senior leaders and their, quote, unsound military plans made at the highest levels.
Yeah.
It openly questions whether the decision-makers in Delhi were even remotely in touch with ground realities.
Which they clearly weren't.
No. But simultaneously, and this is vital for the historical record, the report is highly praiseworthy of the junior leaders.
The lieutenants, the captains, the majors.
And the ordinary soldiers. These men were starved of winter clothing.
Fighting with obsolete Lee-Enfield bolt-action rifles against modern automatic weapons.
Placed in impossible tactical positions and completely let down by their senior commanders.
Yeah.
Yet the report documents that they fought with immense valor. They held their ground in isolated pockets until they were completely out of ammunition or just overrun.
And it's really important to note that the report doesn't just paint a picture of universal nationwide failure.
No, it isn't.
Brooks and Phagat draw a very sharp contrast with the operations of the Western Command in the Ladakh sector.
Right, the Western Front.
Our sources tell us the HBR actually praised the actions of the Western Command. Why? Because the commanders there did exactly what the Eastern Command failed to do.
They showed moral courage.
When Delhi ordered them to implement the forward policy, the Western commanders actually did a professional reappraisal of their preparedness.
They looked at the logistics, they counted the troops, they measured the terrain.
And they raised a professional objection. They told Army headquarters that India's military means were simply not adequate to pursue the political directives, and they officially requested additional troops before they would move forward.
And what was the response from Army headquarters to this display of moral and professional courage?
They were completely ignored.
Ignored. Army HQ paid absolutely no heed to the quantum of forces required.
The Henderson Brooks Report states clearly that based on various pre-war war games and logistical assessments, both the Ladakh and the Eastern theaters had a minimum requirement of at least one full division of troops each.
Just to begin addressing the defensive imbalance with China.
That was the absolute baseline requirement to even make a stand.
But those desperate requests were sidelined by the wishful thinking in Delhi.
Right. And tragically, those necessary reinforcements only arrived in the theaters after the war had already been conclusively lost.
Too little, too late.
Okay, so Menon ensures no one writes anything down. Call is commanding from a sickbed. Mullick's intelligence is 7 weeks late, and the penny pockets are overrun.
That's the summary, yeah.
When the war inevitably ends in disaster, the military realizes they can't survive another blind failure like this. They demand an autopsy, and that's how we get the Henderson Brooks Report.
Exactly.
So we have seen the incredibly accurate prophecy of Sardar Patel in 1950. We have analyzed the deeply dysfunctional cast of characters making the decisions in the lead-up, and we have read the brutal findings of the top-secret Henderson Brooks autopsy.
The full picture.
Right. Now, for you, the listener, who has been faithfully tracking this entire 6-module revision series, it is time to bring all of these threads together.
The final synthesis.
If you want to map out why this failed so spectacularly, you really only have to look at 3 cascading levels. We are going to build the ultimate mental map of the 1962 Sino-Indian War.
I love this.
This is your final revision, your synthesis, your exam toolkit. Let's break this down into the strategic, operational, and tactical levels.
That is the perfect way to structure a comprehensive understanding of this conflict. Let's start at the top. The strategic level.
Okay, hit me.
The foundational shift here is China's annexation of Tibet in 1950. That singular action completely erased the historical buffer zone and brought a strong, united, ideologically driven Chinese military directly to India's gates.
And on the Indian side?
On the Indian side, strategic failure was driven by political assumptions that bred institutional weakness. You have Nehru's paranoia of a military coup, which leads to an over-reliance on lightly armed police forces rather than a robust standing army.
And the intelligence failure.
Right. You have national intelligence driven entirely by wishful thinking, specifically B.N. Mullick's insistence that China simply would not react to Indian border maneuvers.
Completely ignoring Patel's earlier warnings of perfidy and ideological imperialism.
Exactly. So the strategy is built on a foundation of sand.
And that cascades down to the operational level. The defining failure here is the execution of the forward policy.
Yes.
This policy of aggressive territorial claiming was implemented without the necessary logistics, without road infrastructure, and without the minimum requirement of troops.
Which the HBR proved was at least one full division per sector.
Exactly. And overseeing this operational nightmare was a deeply dysfunctional high command. You have a defense minister in Menon intentionally keeping no minutes to avoid accountability.
Paralyzing the bureaucracy.
You have a timid army chief in Fapar unable to provide professional pushback. And you have an ambitious, inexperienced theater commander in General Call trying to run a mountain war from a sickbed via person-to-person signals.
Completely bypassing the chain of command.
Yeah.
Which brings the disaster crashing down to the tactical level.
Right. Because of the strategic and operational failures, the troops on the ground were structurally set up to fail.
Structurally doomed.
They were starved of cold weather equipment and adequate ammunition. They were scattered into unsupported penny pockets that were easily surrounded and destroyed.
They suffered under frequent, chaotic changes in command, delayed intelligence, and the panic reactions of senior officers like we saw at Salah.
Yet, the tactical level is also where we see the only redeeming factor of the conflict, which is that the junior leadership and the common soldiers displayed unmatched, incredible valor in the face of overwhelming odds.
True heroism in a failing system.
And the outcome of all these cascading failures is a shattering military defeat. It led to a massive political reckoning.
A huge shakeup. Army Chief Thapar resigns in disgrace. Theater Commander Call resigns. Defense Minister Menon is forced to resign.
And Prime Minister Nehru is left a broken man.
Utterly disillusioned with his lifelong policy of non-alignment, and he passes away just a few years later.
But, and this is the crucial part of the synthesis, this shattering defeat also forced a brutal, honest realization of India's capability mismatch.
It was a wake-up call.
Let's frame that realization using a mistake consequence lesson framework, which is just a perfect tool for structuring a strategic briefing or an exam answer.
It's highly effective. If we synthesize the entire conflict into that framework, the primary mistake was subordinating military reality to political vanity and wishful thinking. It was allowing intelligence to dictate operations based on assumptions rather than capabilities, and failing to listen to professional military advice regarding logistics and troop requirements.
And the consequence.
The consequence of that massive institutional mistake was the complete collapse of the Eastern Front, the disintegration of army formations in NIFA, the loss of national prestige, and a humiliating, decisive national defeat on the world stage.
But the lesson.
The institutional learning that was pulled from the ashes of 1962 was the absolute non-negotiable necessity of integrated civil-military planning.
It proved the need for maintaining an objective, independent intelligence apparatus that speaks truth to power.
It highlighted the critical importance of mountain logistics. Above all, it proved that diplomatic posture must be backed up by hard military wherewithal.
Right, 1962 forced a massive paradigm shift in India, moving the nation from a romanticized view of non-alignment and strategic optimism to a hard-nosed, realist commitment to military preparedness.
And that shapes everything that comes after, right up to modern deterrence at places like Nathula or Galwan. It all tracks back to these lessons.
Let's lock this into a chronological chain of causality. If you are preparing to analyze the causes of this defeat, you can trace it through 7 undeniable steps. Ready?
Let's do it.
Step 1. Tibet changes the security environment. The historical Himalayan buffer disappears, just as Patel warned.
Step 2. The border dispute develops without that buffer, bringing two massive nations into direct physical friction.
Step 3. Patel's clear-eyed warnings of a two-front threat and cloaked communist imperialism are completely ignored in favor of diplomatic optimism.
Step 4. The forward policy is recklessly adopted based on the flawed intelligence assumption that China won't react.
Step 5. The massive capability mismatch between India's police post mentality and China's military readiness is violently exposed in the mountains.
Step 6. The Chinese offensive succeeds, shattering the Indian lines and exposing the deep dysfunction of the higher command.
Step 7. India is forced to learn, to reform, and to fundamentally transform its approach to national security and border defense.
That 7-step chain is the perfect mental map.
It really covers it all.
Whether you are evaluating the forward policy, discussing the role of the higher direction of war, or detailing the importance of logistics in mountain warfare, you can use that exact chronological flow to structure your understanding.
You start with the strategic background of Tibet, move through the operational failures of the forward policy and command dysfunction, detail the tactical realities of the penny pockets, and always conclude with the lessons learned and their modern application to national security.
Always connect it back to the lessons.
Which brings us to the lingering shadow of this conflict. As we wrap up this massive deep dive, we have to acknowledge the enduring secrecy surrounding these events.
Because the story isn't fully public yet.
No. The Henderson Brooks Report, commissioned in the immediate aftermath of 1962, remains largely classified to this very day.
Decades later.
The source material notes that it was only selectively released, just 64 pages out of the 190-page report, by the Australian journalist Neville Maxwell, who leaked it on his blog in 2014.
Right.
The rest of it, the full, unredacted truth of the operational failures, remains locked in the safe custody of the Military Operation Branch at Army Headquarters.
But even with only a fraction of the report available to the public,
And with the benefit of looking back at Patel's brilliantly prophetic 1950 letter,
the lessons are glaringly, undeniably clear. They are lessons that were written in the blood of the junior soldiers who were asked to do the impossible by a leadership that refused to face reality.
and that reality is something every modern nation must continually grapple with.
It is. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, one that builds directly on the specific sources we've explored today.
Go ahead.
Sardar Patel warned in 1950 that certain adversaries use a cloak of ideology to conceal deeply rooted historical claims. We know from history that historical territorial claims can lay dormant for decades or even centuries before being activated when the strategic timing is right.
When the moment strikes.
Exactly. So as you look at the geopolitics of the world today, ask yourself, how well does a modern nation balance the earnest, necessary desire for diplomatic peace with the absolute, uncompromising necessity of preparing for the worst-case scenario?
When does diplomatic optimism cross the line into institutional blindness?
A question that resonates just as powerfully today as it did in the freezing winter of 1962.
This completes the Sino-Indian War 1962 revision series. The next military history module shifts from conventional warfare to the changing character of future conflict through unrestricted warfare.